My name's Nick Hayhurst from Hayhurst & Co Architects, and I'm also the course leader for the AirMark in Architecture at the University of Brighton. I'm here today to talk about Lawn House, a project where we did a particularly elaborate kind of concrete worktop, and also to talk about some of the other residential projects that we've done over the last few years, with a particular kind of emphasis on the relationship between kind of materials and the spaces that they form and can make. Over the years, we've had a kind of a particular kind of interest and engagement with how materials make spaces, and looking at this idea of an architecture of the inhabited cabinet and an architecture of the room, and how this is expanded to make projects and to make spaces using a different set of material languages. So we started off 8 years ago carrying out very small projects, looking at use of materials and adaptability of cheap materials, cheap ways of doing things, to create different kinds of effects and different kind of spaces or spatial arrangements. And we also became quite interested in how you kind of use materials to try and adapt spaces for different kinds of uses. Lawn House was a project that we started looking at in the beginning of 2010 and was eventually complete in the summer of 2011. And the house is located in Snaresbrook in East London, and the clients had recently bought property and were looking to make a kind of sizable extension to it. And it's quite interesting looking at the back of the house at the moment and the kind of the interesting kind of Victorian turn of the century kind of veranda that existed on the house at the moment. And in some ways the client wanted to kind of keep this and reuse it and find an interesting adaptive reuse of it, but eventually it just proved too narrow in terms of footprint for reuse. And so eventually they ended up using the carcass of the veranda for a little summer house halfway down the garden. One of the kind of the big challenges with this project was how, because of the width of the rear of the house, was how to make a roof profile that fitted with the character of the verandas that existed before and also the character of the existing house. The client was very keen not to have a flat roof, and so it then became a challenge of how to create a series of pitched roofs that some way dealt with the character of the house. And so, you know, the diagram of the old and the diagram of the new, looking at somehow kind of taking on that character of the veranda, and then looking through the kind of the stage development. So the first image looking at the original formation of the spaces, and then this idea of taking a series of smaller pitched roofs that sit kind of directly below the first floor sills, and then stretching it across the site. Then doing a little bit of a modification to fit with what the planners were kind of interested in, and then kind of dividing it, kind of carving out a series of internal and external spaces within it, and then nipping and tucking to make it kind of suit and fit the spaces. So that was the rear elevation of the house before, and then the proposed elevation showing the final resolution of the pitches. The existing plan, and then the proposed plan, where you can see the kind of the curtilage of the existing house, which was then carved open to form a new series of spaces, and where the concrete kitchen island forms the centrepiece to those spaces, and from that kitchen island, the idea that you have a full set of visibility over the kind of surrounding spaces, so you can look into the kind of the play area. You can look into the place where the pool room is. You can look into the dining table area, and then also look over to the garden. And so the concrete island very much became the kind of the centre stage of the set of spaces. And then the concrete flooring finish then continued down to the garden, and you can see on the left-hand side here of this image the steps kind of coming down and touching the garden level, and there we see the concrete steps kind of coming up from the garden level onto a terrace, and then going up again and forming the kitchen island. And here's the kind of the edge from the cocktail bar end looking at the kitchen island, and then again from inside of the space, looking out. The fabrication process was quite a fascinating experience to watch, and White and Reed were the subcontractors who carried out the work. And it took a great amount of kind of forethought and engineering on both their part and our part to work out how the formwork would be put together, how it would be pulled off, and the number of pours that it would be done in. So it was effectively done in 3 pours, one for the outside terrace and steps, one for the inside terrace, floor area, and then one for the kitchen island and the steps, and that was all done in 1 pour. And so you can see in this slide the step pieces again being made, so there was also kind of a thought given into how the formwork would be taken off, and in some ways the formwork was actually quite elegant in itself, and almost as elegant as the kitchen island itself when it was finished. And these are the steps being formwork for the steps and the rebar. And then this was the process for the finishing. So whereas the floor was kind of machine finished, the worktop was hand troweled finish, and you can see White and Reed kind of working here. And you can also see the amount of kind of the substructure that's necessary to actually build the whole thing. And here's the final set of pouring. It was also quite interesting watching White and Reed work. They're the kind of normally the most mild-mannered, kind of calm guys who are kind of really good to work with. But it's also quite interesting on the day of the pour itself, when there are about 5 guys there. They become very focused and very kind of concentrated on delivering the worktop. And because of the kind of the speed at which and the kind of the time conditions of that day, it becomes it can become quite a fraught process. And so the main contractor and everybody else had to kind of get out their way whilst they were kind of carrying out their work. One of the other interesting things was that in order to get the sliding doors to work, and so you achieved this flush finish from inside to out, was also you ended up with a series of very kind of thin elements of the polished concrete floor, which had to be quite carefully done. So this is where the 3 sliding doors run across, and so you have very thin pieces of kind of concrete kind of in there. And then this is the process this is the part when the formwork came off, and you can see the different coloration in the concrete as it's beginning to dry. So it's much lighter at the top, where it's relatively drier, and you can see the kind of the moisture kind of filtering down, and a much darker colour at the bottom around the steps. It's also the kind of thing where the clients have to be quite careful about using the concrete for the first, especially the first couple of weeks, couple of months or so, as the curing process kind of continues, and that there's a sort of slightly kind of obsessive kind of cleaning process that happens, but normally that kind of resolves itself after about the first month or so. Here's the kitchen island from the other side. The polishing process probably took about a day, and then they come back, about 2 weeks later and do another kind of polishing, and then also sealing it after that. Okay, I'm also going to show 2 other houses that we've kind of completed recently. The first one, Hampstead Beach House, which is in Belsize Park. And here we were using a kind of a timber material to define spaces from inside to out. But we had this nice idea at the beginning that we'd have this idea of a concrete carpet. Unfortunately, the idea of using concrete didn't come through on this one, and a tiled floor was used instead. But still, the principle of using a particular material to reinforce a set of spatial ideas about how materials and spaces are used kind of together. And so here the concrete carpet kind of defines the spaces from inside to out, and then in this case the white larch defines the kind of the spaces around it, and then there's a series of kind of openings in it. And so that's the rear elevation, the previous plans, and then the proposed plans where you can see the concrete, this idea of the concrete carpet that runs from inside to out, and the other materials kind of housing the other spaces around it. The third project which I'm going to show is Hayhurst, which was completed at the end of 2011 and was a recipient of RIBA National Award in 2012 and also the RIBA London Small Projects Award. This was a project where we worked very closely with the clients to develop a project which kind of sat quite comfortably within the grain of the shape of the existing site. So we had quite an awkward site, which started with a frontage of about 1.5 metres wide, a front elevation of about 6 metres wide, but then expanded to about 10 metres wide, 10.5 metres wide at its widest point. And it's quite an odd site and difficult site to work with. In many ways, the design evolved as a response to the angle geometry of the existing site. And we started to look at this idea of kind of sinking the floor by about 0.5 metre deliberately to maintain a 2.8 metre floor to ceiling height, to maintain that kind of sense of a Victorian space rather than coming into a low 2.4 metre floor to ceiling height. And this also provided a more intimate relationship with the garden and spaces outside. And then again using materials. So in this case slate and timber. So the slate forms the enclosure, and the timber defines the kind of the interior condition, which then wraps around and forms a dining space, little nooks and crannies and timber seats. And one of the peculiarities of the plan is this kind of extra room that exists between the kind of the rear formal room and the staircase, which in our case got used to reform a new staircase, and we deliberately wanted to kind of challenge some of the conditions of the existing building. So here you see the kind of the staircase kind of twisting and winding round to get down to the dining room, and then deliberately opening up at the point where the door to the utility room is, deliberately, because when you come out of the utility room you have a big kind of clothes basket, and this idea of kind of providing kind of bits of spaces in particular places, but also about providing a kind of a staggered route down, and a kind of a slightly staggered route down to the dining spaces. One of the other things to do with materials is also looking at the materials of the existing house. So here we had quite a nice set of mosaic floor tiles in the floor and the hall level of the existing house. And conventionally you take timber floorboards across the way, and what we wanted to do here was actually continue to take it up, which means that you then get much smaller module pieces of timber being used at the junction with the existing mosaic floor. And so there was this kind of nice kind of scalar transition from the old to the new. And then this was kind of, as you then drop down into the kitchen space, looking out to the rear and the dining area, and then also using a material to create other kind of nooks and crannies. So where the owl is where the curtains are kind of kept behind, and to the left of the lamp you can see the little kind of opening where you can kind of control the pulley for the curtains, and they come in and out, and also see the kind of the way of manipulating and using the timber to create a sense of space, and this idea of the kind of inhabited cabinet, which we talk about quite a lot. And the floor was quite an interesting material. It's a ceramic tile which is 1200 by 200 that was then water cut on either end to then form the herringbone pattern, and also looks like a timber floor. And the other kind of benefit, which I don't think we fully realised until it was actually complete, was that that having the white floor actually creates a lot of kind of luminosity kind of into the extension, and actually for many times during the day you don't actually need the artificial lighting on, which is quite unusual in a slightly sunken kitchen. And so you kind of get this kind of extra benefit of the space. So again, it becomes quite an interesting use of using slate, using timber, and in this case a ceramic tile, to accentuate a particular set of spatial conditions.